You're in the supermarket, somewhere around the tinned goods, and you look up. 20 feet away, comparing two brands of pasta, is someone you know, not a close friend. A person from work you left 3 years ago, or someone from your old gym, or the parent of a child who used to be in your child's class. Your body decides before you do. You turn into the next aisle. You develop a sudden and profound interest in the ingredients list of something you have no intention of buying. You reroute your entire shopping trip around a person you have nothing whatsoever against. And on the walk home, you feel faintly terrible about it without being able to explain what you did wrong, or why you did it, or why doing the alternative felt so genuinely unbearable in the moment. Almost everyone does this. Most people quietly suspect it makes them a slightly bad person. I want to make an argument that it does not, and that what you experienced in that aisle is a precise and predictable failure of a social system you use hundreds of times a day without ever noticing it. There's also a finding buried in this research about what the other person was probably doing, and about whether they saw you at all, that changes the whole picture. I will come back to it near the end, because it takes the guilt out of this in a way that no amount of reassurance can. Start with what normally happens, because in order to understand why this breaks, you first need to see the machinery working. In 1963, the sociologist Erving Goffman published a book called Behavior in Public Places. Goffman spent his career doing something unusual for a social scientist. Rather than running experiments, he watched people extremely closely and described the invisible rules they were following, rules nobody had ever written down, and everybody obeyed perfectly. One of those rules he called civil inattention. Here's how it works. You're walking down a street. Another person approaches. Goffman observed that at a certain distance, roughly 8 feet, you look at them. It is a real look, brief and direct. Your eyes may pass across theirs. Then, as they get closer, you cast your eyes down or away, and you both pass without further contact. Goffman described that downward drop as a dimming of lights. That tiny sequence look and then withdraw is doing an enormous amount of work. It says 3 things at once, none of them out loud. It says, I have seen you, so you're not invisible to me. It says, I have no hostile intent, because a person who meant harm would either stare or refuse to look at all. And it says, I'm not seeking to interact with you, so you're free to carry on with your day. Goffman thought this was the smallest of all the rituals people perform with each other, and also one of the most constant. He described civil inattention as the most frequent interpersonal ritual there is. You perform it dozens or hundreds of times a day. On pavements, in lifts, on trains, in shops, you have never once thought about it, and you have never once got it wrong. Now, here's the detail that matters. And it is the reason this whole video exists. Goffman was specific about a condition attached to the ritual. In performing civil inattention, your eyes may pass over the other person's eyes, but recognition is not permitted. That is the rule. You acknowledge a human being is present. You do not acknowledge who they are. Read that again because everything follows from it. Civil inattention is a tool designed exclusively for strangers. Its entire function depends on nobody being recognizable. The moment recognition enters the situation, the ritual becomes unusable, because a recognized person who receives civil inattention has not been treated politely. They have been cut. So consider what actually happened in the supermarket. You looked up, your visual system identified a known face in roughly the time it takes to blink, involuntarily with no input from you whatsoever. And in that instant, the tool you used to navigate 99% of all public encounters was withdrawn from your hands. You were not being antisocial. You were standing in a social situation for which your default equipment does not work, holding nothing. So what is left? Only 2 options. And this is where it gets uncomfortable, because both of them cost something. The first option is full engagement. You catch their eye, you smile, you walk over, you have a conversation. This is what you're supposed to do. It is also, in that specific moment, expensive in a way that people rarely spell out. Consider what a conversation with an acquaintance actually requires. You need to retrieve their name, which may or may not arrive. You need to remember the context you knew them in, and roughly when. You need to recall whatever you knew about their life, which is probably several years out of date, and you need to avoid asking about anything that may have changed, because asking someone how their partner is when that partner has left is a specific kind of disaster. Then you need to generate 3 or 4 minutes of content out of a shared history that ended some time ago, and was never especially deep to begin with, and then, hardest of all, you need to end it, cleanly, without either of you feeling dismissed. That is a genuinely demanding piece of social work, performed without preparation, while holding a basket, in a supermarket. The second option is to pretend you have not seen them. This one is cheap and instant, and it carries exactly one risk. If they saw you seeing them, you have not avoided an interaction. You have delivered an insult, and because you cannot know whether they saw you, you are gambling with information you do not have. So you stand there for a fraction of a second, holding two bad options, and your body picks the one that requires nothing. Into the next aisle you go. Notice that at no point in this did you dislike the person. Now, why acquaintances specifically? Because the difficulty is not spread evenly. Picture the whole range of people you might meet in a shop. At one end sit total strangers, easy. Civil inattention handles them perfectly, automatically, without a flicker of thought. At the other end sit the people closest to you, also easy. If you spot your sister across the shop, no calculation happens at all. You go straight over. There is no script to work out, because the relationship is strong enough to absorb anything, including a short conversation that ends abruptly, including saying you're in a rush, including saying almost nothing at all. Now look at the middle. The middle is where the acquaintance sits, and the middle has no tool. Civil inattention is unavailable because you recognize them. Full engagement is available but expensive, and you have no relationship robust enough to make a 2-minute version of it feel acceptable. So you're stuck between a ritual you're not allowed to use, and a ritual you cannot afford. That gap is the whole phenomenon. It is not a flaw in you, it is a hole in the social toolkit, and it is exactly the shape of the person you just avoided. Which explains something people find puzzling about their own behavior. You will happily chat to a total stranger at a bus stop. You will happily talk to your closest friend for an hour. And you will hide behind a display of breakfast cereal to avoid someone you used to sit near at work and always quite liked. The people you avoid most are not the people you like least. They are the people you know a medium amount. There is another mechanism sitting underneath this, and it explains the specific flavor of panic in that moment. Recognizing a face is extremely fast. Your brain identifies known faces in a fraction of a second before any conscious effort. But the information attached to that face, the name, the context, when you last met, what you talked about, all of that has to be retrieved separately and slowly. So there's a real window, sometimes several seconds long, in which you are certain you know this person and cannot produce a single usable fact about them. Now put yourself back in the aisle with that in mind. Some part of you understands that if you walk over, you may arrive with nothing. No name, no idea whether their company still exists, no memory of whether you left that conversation on good terms. You're not only weighing whether to have a conversation, you're weighing whether you can perform competently in one, starting from a blank. And there is a specific dread attached to being caught, not knowing someone who clearly knows you, because it communicates something unflattering and difficult to walk back. It says they mattered less to you than you mattered to them. Avoiding the encounter avoids that risk entirely. Nobody finds out what you forgot. All of this so far has treated the encounter as a real thing. Two people, mutual awareness, a genuine social problem to be solved. Now the finding I promised, and it does something rather liberating to everything I have just described. In 2000, Thomas Gilovich, Victoria Medvec, and Kenneth Savitsky published a paper in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology about a bias they named the spotlight effect. Their experiment has become a small classic. They brought a student into a lab and asked them to put on a large t-shirt with a photograph of the singer Barry Manilow on the front, a choice the researchers had already established this particular group of students found embarrassing. The student then walked into a room where several other people were sitting, filling in questionnaires. After a few minutes, the wearer was brought back out and asked one question: what percentage of the people in that room could tell you whose face was on your shirt? The wearers estimated on average around 46%. Nearly half the room, the actual figure was about 23%. Roughly a quarter, they had imagined an audience twice the size of the one that existed. The researchers then checked whether this was only about embarrassment, so they ran it again with shirts people were happy to wear, featuring figures the students admired, same overestimation. In that version, wearers guessed around 48%, and the real figure came in under 10%. A third study moved it from clothing to behavior. In group discussions, people consistently overestimated how much their own contributions stood out to everyone else, both the good ones and the embarrassing ones. The pattern is not about shirts. It is a general feature of how people perceive their own visibility. You are the permanent center of your own attention, and you quietly assume you occupy a similar position in everyone else's. One honest note on those numbers: the direction of the error was reliable across every version they ran, but the size of it moved around depending on the study. And the researchers found that people's estimates did correlate with reality. So this is a systematic overestimate rather than pure invention. Now carry that back to the supermarket. because it changes the premise you were working from. You believed you were in a situation. You believed they had seen you, clocked you, recognized you, and were now watching to see what you would do. There's a good chance none of that happened. They were looking at pasta. Their attention was on their own list, their own afternoon, their own preoccupations. The beam of attention you felt on you was one you generated yourself, and the audience you were performing for was smaller than you assumed, and may not have been in the room at all. There is a second half to this, and it is the part I find genuinely funny. Suppose they did see you. What do you imagine they were doing at that moment? They were standing in front of the pasta running the identical calculation. Do I go over? Do I remember their name? What do I actually say? How do I get out of it? How long has it been? Did we leave things well? Two people, 20 feet apart, each holding the same impossible problem, each independently arriving at the same solution, and each walking away privately convinced that they were the rude one, which means the shared reality of that moment is not one person avoiding another. It is two people simultaneously protecting each other from an interaction that neither of them had a way to perform, followed by two separate walks home containing two separate portions of unnecessary guilt. So far, this has all been permission. It was not your fault, the tool was missing, they probably did not see you. They were doing it too. I want to be careful, because there's a real cost here, and a video that ended on comfort would be leaving out the part that matters. Those medium-strength relationships are worth something. Researchers use the term weak ties for the people who sit in that middle band. The former colleague, the neighbor 2 doors down, the person at the gym, the parent from the school gate. Work in this area has repeatedly found that brief, ordinary interactions with these people are associated with a greater sense of belonging and better mood, and that people who have more of these small daily exchanges tend to report feeling more connected overall. That is worth sitting with, because it means the aisle you turned down was not neutral. The middle band, the exact band with no social tool attached to it, is the band that quietly does a large amount of the work in making a person feel embedded in a place. Your close friends give you depth. The wider band gives you the sense that you live somewhere among people who know your face. And every one of those relationships is maintained by precisely the 60-second interaction you have been engineering your way out of. So the avoidance is understandable. It is not a character flaw, and it does have a price. All three of those are true at once. What do you actually do about it? The advice to just say hello misses the point because it ignores the thing that made you flee, which was never the hello. It was everything that comes after the hello, and specifically the ending. So the useful move is a smaller one, and it works by solving the exit rather than the entrance. You're allowed to acknowledge someone without opening a conversation. A raised hand, a nod, a smile as you keep moving. 3 seconds, no obligation, no retrieval required. You do not need their name for this. You do not need to know whether their company still exists. What that does is remove the only genuinely bad outcome in the whole scenario, which was them seeing you see them and then watching you turn away. It costs you nothing, and it settles the question completely. And if you do stop, the ending is the part to prepare rather than the middle. Naming a reason gives both of you a clean exit that nobody has to feel bad about. I should let you get on. I have got a car on a meter. Anything that provides a shape. The reason those work is that the fear was never really about the conversation. It was about being trapped inside one with no visible way out. Provide the way out at the start, and the trap disappears. Here's the reframe worth carrying out of this. You have been treating that moment in the aisle as evidence about your character, proof that you're awkward or cold, or secretly antisocial, or bad at the ordinary business of being a person among people. What actually happened is that you walked into a specific structural gap. You have a beautifully engineered tool for strangers, and a beautifully engineered tool for people you love. And between them sits an entire category of human being for whom no tool was ever provided. Every single person you have ever avoided in a supermarket was standing in that same gap, holding nothing, looking for an exit. The guilt you carried home was for a crime that required 2 people, and the other one has been carrying their half of it ever since. That is the cue most people miss. If you have ever changed direction in a shop to avoid someone you actually liked, leave a comment and tell me where it happened. Subscribe to Psychology Q, and I will keep showing you the signals hiding in plain sight.